In this episode, Sam sits down with Travis Fischer, open source contributor and founder. They discuss building the middle layer of abstraction for AI tools.
If you want to provide a world-class developer experience, you have to be very opinionated. Otherwise, you try to do a kitchen sink and you support everything, and you fundamentally they're competing odds, right?
How AI will impact programming in the future.
Certain types of code patterns in the future, say go five years down the line, will it be like things like dry? Will that be an anti pattern? Whereas no, repeat yourself everywhere because it's all just like disposable code.
And the implications of AI for content creators and consumers.
Scarcest resource is people's attention, right? And this is going to become even more scarce as the personalized and the AI, like the ability to capture your attention when everything is hyper personalized is going to be harder. What are the secondary effects of that?
Let's get started.
When ChatGPT launched last November 30th, I mean, it was the first time that I had seen an AI product that just really blew my mind. And I was immediately like, I want to hack on this, right? And it was before the official API was out. And so I started open up network tab and reverse engineering the ChatGPT API and released the ChatGPT NPM package. And then that just got used by a whole bunch of devs to build really interesting things. And just that early wave of like people realizing the implications of what LLMs were going to be able to do, because it just made certain things that were previously just impossible, like now at the cusp of possible, right? And so was having a lot of fun just hacking on that. Built the ChatGPT Twitter bot. I think that has 150K followers now. Unfortunately, like the Elon Musk changes to the Twitter API and the fact that it's so expensive to actually like reply and do post requests made that so I had to disable like the auto reply. But that was also a lot of people's first like introduction to ChatGPT last year was like using the Twitter bot, because certain countries like OpenAI wasn't enabled in, and I did some analysis after the fact, like all of the languages, just using a Hugging Face model to detect the language, and there were hundreds of thousands of the Twitter interactions with the bot, and just graphing over time like the different languages, and you could really see as ChatGPT got discovered in Germany or in China. And I was like, one night it went from 40K to 80K in followers in a week. And I was like, what is going on? And I tracked it back to this one tweet that went super viral in China by one of the like Chinese influencers or something. And I was constantly like pasting it in and trying to translate because I had no idea what these tweets said. But that was just a fun journey and my kind of introduction to what I think I'd refer to as AI engineering now.
Yeah, that's super cool. I follow your pretty much anything that you're working on. I try to follow closely. You're one of the few GitHub profiles that I'll like go out of my way to go stalk to see what you're.
Oh, thanks, man.
It's always interesting. I'm like, what's Travis starring on GitHub? What's Travis pushing up?
Yeah,
there's always good things in there.
Yeah, I love open source, and I think the intersection of open source and AI right now is really at the frontier of a lot of interesting stuff that's going on. And there's so many smart people out there working on cool, like even if AI were like the base models and the progress were to just pause, nobody thinks that's going to happen. But even if it were to happen, the implications of that we're going to be exploring for years. And so just being at the cutting edge of that, and a lot of that is just happening out in the open on GitHub. Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool to see just all these incredibly talented devs discover this new, like a new hammer.
Yeah,
we didn't have fire, but we had all these other things, and now we have fire, and we're like, oh my god, what can we do with this?
Yeah,
and even a year into it, I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface.
Talking about new tools, Gemini, Google dropped their new line of models, Gemini, yesterday, and there's all sorts of things you could talk about there. But the one thing, the first thing I did was open up their paper that they released alongside it, and I Command F and search for tools, and I wanted to see like what were the kind of more agentic like tool using use cases, and they were very light on that. There were a couple of people who were like the co-leads for tool use, and they mentioned how a lot of the results could be improved with tools, but they were very light on actually talking about that stuff. because it was very much about releasing the base models. And I will say, I think like OpenAI leading the developer expectations, and the fact that like previously tool use was expected to happen in user land, and it was like the React pattern, and that's how LangChain like got off to a start. And then as soon as OpenAI released function calling support, and now like tools, which is parallel functions, and it's a little bit a better abstraction, like that is just so powerful to support natively, like at the API layer. And I think when I look at Gemini is going to be supported in Google Vertex AI, like their SDKs. I am bullish on their ability to have like speed and latency be like unbelievable. That's one thing I think, because they have a completely custom architecture and they're just world class at that. But like certain things that I think OpenAI has set a precedent. If you don't support just tools or now JSON mode, like things that are just like, if you're building at the edge of the stuff that are just like second nature, like I'm not even gonna try it out. Like maybe I'll try it, but you know.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. Like we use tools for pretty much everything that we do, because it allows you to interface with other systems, right? Without tools or some way to do function calling, you can do RAG and get back like unstructured data, and that's cool and awesome. But I need to be able to use the rest of my system how I want to and how I'm used to being able to. And it goes into this broader concept of like integrating LLMs into the software stack that exists today. So it's just like backwards compatible thing. Like how do we make the inputs and outputs work with the systems that run the world, essentially?
Yeah, like one thing I wanna touch on there. I was talking with my friend about this the other day. Like currently, I'd say one of the highest leverage skills that you can learn as a generalist engineer or as a backend engineer is just to get really good at data modeling. It's a topic that has a lot of depth to it. You can do the simple version like really quick, but if you want to scale, if you want to think about things like domain-driven design and how to have data models that like not just scale in terms of number of users, but scale in terms of team, having like different microservices or teams and stuff. Like that's an incredibly important discipline. And then what is the equivalent of data modeling for the LLM age? I think it's going to be like tool modeling and the actual design of those tool interfaces and what they how you do the like the prompt engineering and tricks or fine tuning or any of these kind of more LLM specific techniques around the tool use is going to become its own like sub discipline that I think is going to have a lot of depth to it too.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think we've had Jason Liu on, who's another Twitter dev that I love to follow.
But is he the pedantic is all you need guy?
Yeah. He is. He's the author of Instructor. He has this whole thing about like who owns the prompts. So let's say that you want your agent to interact with the Stripe API. Is Stripe providing the prompts that you use to interact with their API? Or are you like, is it some open source package? Like who's writing the machine documentation essentially? That Stripe invests very heavily in their developer docs. It's one of the things that they're well known for. Is the expectation that they will also begin to provide like Stripe tools that go beyond just, hey, here's our REST API that you can hit. Like
standardizing that stuff. Like I actually the Wikimedia Foundation released wiki functions like literally yesterday. And I clicked on it because it sounded like it was this type of stuff. At least what they currently have is a lot of stuff around like getting string suffixes, like really low level, like not the most useful tools, but tools that are useful maybe for building scripts to edit Wikipedia and stuff. And so I think the concept of thinking about where we'll head to in a world where you have normalized or standardized tool definitions, and how do you interact with external APIs? I think it's still very much an open question. Like one of the interesting things that I found about OpenAI's first foray into this around ChatGPT plugins, and people reverse engineered what was going on, because you define your external API as an open API spec. That's great. I love the open API spec, except for the fact that I oftentimes will confuse open API and OpenAI, and you start getting into that. But So you define your open API spec, it's standard, awesome. And then they ingest that, do some pre-processing, and the version that was leaked, who knows if this is still the case, but that those, each one of those endpoints, which they're referring to now as actions, gets converted from like a JSON schema and the open API wrapper metadata into a TypeScript definition. And that, like a series of TypeScript definitions is what is injected into the context of the model in order for it to do its tool selection and tool invocation. So that was, I found pretty interesting that they use that versus, for instance, like you could have converted into Python. Probably like the strong typing there, it's easier to guarantee that you or do self-healing on their end if the types don't match up, or I don't know, right? I'm speculating, but I thought that was an interesting, if anyone's going to set the standard for that, I think OpenAI is in a really good, the best place that you can be to lead from example.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely seems to be the case. It is interesting that they use TypeScript as an example. I'm sure that they experimented with other things, but using something that's like programmable, right? So they're doing language definitions, but that can be extended and a bunch of interest.
Well, it's like
kind of long term.
The pluses that I would see are one, there's like an enormous amount of training data out there for it. Like it's not the only strongly typed language. They could have used C# or Java or something, right? But it's like lightweight. There's a lot of open source TypeScript. And then two, it's statically analyzable, whereas something like Python is harder to do because it's less built into the language. Yeah, I don't know though. It's an interesting
layer, because TypeScript has a layer on the top of JavaScript. It has a bunch of like libraries that you can pull where you like just want the typing pieces, right? Like you just want to check the types, you don't need to do all the other stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think this kind of gets. Oh, go ahead.
I was just to say, like maybe leading into a little bit of what I've been jamming on. One of the things you mentioned, Jason Liu, an instructor, and like the Python world around AI engineering just gets so much love because a lot of the traditional ML guys, a lot of people who are at the frontier are coming from that like more Python data science, machine learning background. And I love Pydantic. I think like fast API is just like sexy. But I'm coming from a world where a long time ago, I kind of made a decision to really bet heavily on the JavaScript and NPM and TypeScript like ecosystem, or eventually TypeScript, right? Just because I actually think it was like a big change in a line in the sand where if you were to ask someone, what is your average open source developer maybe in 2008, what do they look like? Like the answer to that back then versus today is very different. And the proliferation of these online, very focused, like tiny module ecosystems like NPM or Homebrew or PyPy has really changed the landscape and what it means to be your average open source developer. Because you can be a smaller fish. You don't need to be a massive like a Mozilla or a Google open source or Foundation. And so just I guess talking about like the Python to TypeScript world, I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit in the TypeScript side of that ecosystem to build more legitimate and explore the edges of some of the stuff that is interesting right now. And so one of the projects I've been working on a lot lately is called Dexa, and it's in a similar vein as LangChain or Llama Index. It's a set of tools for effectively using LLMs and doing embeddings and doing common patterns like retrieval augmented generation. I'd say the main differences would be it's TypeScript first and only. That's all that we care about. So I've been jamming on this platform, the startup called Dexa. We can talk about Dexa. I'm very excited about it, but this is like the open source kind of heart of Dexa, and there's been many iterations around the developer experience around trying to get the right abstractions, and it's not perfect, but we do have an abstraction around, for instance, tool calling, and in Python world, it's Pydantic is kind of the runtime like structured way to do schemas and stuff. And in TypeScript land, the most popular one is Zod. So it's like just a nice abstraction for defining reusable tools that you can uh, invoke, make sure that say if the LLM hallucinates some arguments, you want to make sure that you validate that and have a nice kind of feedback loop. And like doing that is great. Doing that with a good DX that's like well tested in production, like that's where I think a lot of these libraries start to fall short. And then the one other thing that I'll say, I'm curious actually from your perspective, because you've been building with this stuff a lot. Like I love what Harrison and the LangChain team have done. The fundamental. So I spent a couple months building an agent library that I still have yet to release, but I've developed some strong opinions here, and I think that the key one is if you're trying to build a developer abstraction and a middleware layer for abstracting all these different LLMs and then all the different like types of use cases and the kind of patterns and what's possible and the best practices are changing pretty fast. For instance, like before OpenAI released like tool calling, like that wasn't really standardized, and like we still expect the underlying models to continue changing pretty rapidly. If you want to provide a world-class developer experience, you have to be very opinionated. Otherwise, you try to do a kitchen sink and you support everything, and you fundamentally like they're competing odds, right? Or competing priorities. So it's challenging. I'd be curious to hear how do you think about the DX layer of AI engineering?
Yeah, I mean, we could do like a whole episode just on this. I think it's one of the most interesting things over the last couple of years. I was one of the first LangChain JavaScript contributors. Paid really close attention to what they were doing with Python before they had their JavaScript library. I've talked to those guys quite a bit. And I used LangChain heavily for a few months, but it did get to a point where it was more of a burden to use than it was really helpful, and it made things that should have been quite simple more difficult than you would anticipate. And a lot of the times, like at one point I was maintaining my own LangChain fork that had like just a couple different things that I needed, and I was like, what am I doing here? And so I just scrapped it and have wanted to build my own library. Now I have my own little custom thing and different tools that I'll do, scripts I'll just like copy and paste. And I think it is hard because both layers, like you're trying to build this middle layer that is the abstraction, and you have the layer above you that's changing, and then you have the layer below you changing. You're in this weird no man's land of like, where do you find ground to stand on? Because there just isn't any, and that's the nature of being at the bleeding edge right now.
Yeah, and you can find ground. I think all in all, like LangChain, what I will say is that they've done an excellent job of building a community and of providing like learning content. And if there's someone who like doesn't know, or just I'm a developer, but I want to start learning about this stuff, I'll be like, go check out a LangChain tutorial,
100%.
or selfishly go check out one of our Dexter tutorials. But you like it is nice to have some abstractions so that it just depends. Like with anything, if you really want to get into the weeds and develop at the cutting edge, like you're going to want to really understand how an LLM works and kind of at least using the hosted kind of foundational models directly, if not experimenting with training your own nano model but there's various levels of like, what do you really need to be productive here? Yeah,
and I think having like a common language around it, like LangChain was the first project to introduce a lot of people to like RAG, right, or React, or like these different kind of flows, and just having a shared vocabulary and like base level of reference points amongst different people, maybe coming from different engineering backgrounds, has been just so valuable. Right now, I think something that would be interesting is to maybe with Dexter, or maybe just like from scratch, but have examples that aren't necessarily you could have some sort of project that's not necessarily monolithic. It's more like a shad CN style thing where you have like a bunch of components, and rather than trying to like make your own styles and whatever, it's just like, no, copy paste the component into your repository. You now own all of the code, but here's kind of conceptually how it should work.
let's talk about this, because I actually think one of the implications of generative programming and Copilot and the applications of LLMs to programming, which I think for both of us is very near and dear to our hearts, is that code and certain principles like dry and stuff they're going to decrease in importance over time. And I think so. I have a friend who founded this company, CoFrame. They're early stage and they're doing generative UI, and the current version they're doing is very simple. It's you give us, say, a headline, a marketing headline on your site, and they'll do generative A/B testing to find like the best,
super cool.
the best converting one. But they're gonna move into images and then full components, full pages. I was jamming with they're going to be open sourcing this framework for doing generative UI called Coffee very soon, and it reminded me of we were talking about ShadeCN UI and Vercel's V0, and I think that the key insight, I'm curious to hear your kind of how you think about this. Like the key insight that ShadeCN UI had compared to all, I mean, there's so many component libraries out there for React, for Vue, for whatever, is to treat the library itself as this throwaway thing where you can copy and paste the code. They have a little helper utility, so if you want to do npx ShadeCN add, but it's really about just like paste some code into your project. Yeah, you can completely customize it. You can edit it with AI or by hand if you want, but it's really like this. It's not this pristine, well-defined like component that you import from npm, and starting to think about that as what are the implications, or how will we develop UIs or maybe certain types of code patterns in the future. Say go five years down the line, will it be like things like dry? Will that be an anti pattern? Where no, repeat yourself everywhere because it's all just like disposable code. And I don't know, right? Like it is interesting to think about, because that's another area where we're on the cusp of understanding the frontier of where we're headed.
Yeah, when you remove the human as the bottleneck of like output, right?
Yeah.
What can you do? I think the key insight for ShadeCN, in my view, is like it's better to copy and paste than to have a bad abstraction. And I would argue that almost every single React library prior to ShadeCN had bad extractions. And it comes down to this idea of who owns the code, right? Material I would put on the opposite end of the spectrum of ShadeCN. It's like monolithic.
Yeah.
You have to use material style components. They control everything, and you have some hooks back into like how different things can be styled and whatever. But you don't really, it's not
even
yours.
even ShadeCN uses it was like Radix UI or whatever under the hood, because it's like such a low level abstraction, right?
Right.
Like, and it's all built on top of React. That's an abstraction. Like at some point it's turtles all the way down. It's just about finding like a really good world-class DX, and then the really good world-class DX that it lends itself well to the AI code generation. Like figuring out what those best practices are. I'm really excited to follow that closely.
Yeah, I think front end development it'll completely change in the next probably even 3 years. I think in 3 years, handwriting React code will be largely a thing of the past. It'll be like if you know how to write jQuery today.
Yeah,
Oh
you'll be like the hipster.
Yeah, exactly.
The hipster that's, no man, I only write my React code by hand. Everyone in the office, all the young guys would be like, "What, bro? What are you smoking?"
Yeah, no kidding. But yeah, and I don't think that we're that far. I mean, I've seen CoFrame, I've seen there's a handful of these other libraries, obviously V0, a lot of smart people with lots of resources like pushing this forward, and it just seems like such an obvious layup for the whole dev community.
One of the things that so I was talking with the CoFrame guys about V0, and I mean I love it. Like everything that Vercel and the team do is very high quality. I do think they have an opportunity to over time develop a library that's like a source of truth for the React front end community, or not even just React, but like Svelte and all these other Vue, that kind of circumvents NPM. And the distinction being, well, it's using AI under the hood. Their costs are non-trivial. If that becomes like Copilot plus plus for React developers, and they could justify, for instance, like a subscription, where if you want to be a 100x React developer or a Next.js developer or Svelte developer, like you need a subscription to V0. I'm not saying they will do that. Like it's at odds with their open source kind of core and roots, but the fact that they have to pay for that, the LLM bill, I don't know. It's interesting to think about what that could become.
Yeah, that is super interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I wonder if this becomes a way for, I don't know, I could imagine a world where this happens and it becomes a way for developers to charge money for the packages that they create, right? If I maintain a set of front-end components and it's on the Vercel NPM store or whatever, can a dev pay me like $3 a month, $5 a month for access?
Yeah, and it goes
on that.
I do too. One thing that I care a lot about, and my tagline is my heart is open source.
Right.
Like I love open source because it is so pure, and I think of it as this massively like decentralized way to push humanity forward. I just have so many friends and like who are just talented, and maybe they just don't fit in with the traditional 9 to 5 or working at big tech or something. But like open source, I view it as this creative pursuit. And I love the creator economy, passion economy, like this idea that you can build a personal brand for yourself, that is a way to scale yourself by sharing your creative outlets, whatever that may be. Maybe you love creating YouTube videos. Maybe you like creating art. But for developers, for us, that's a way to share with the world and to I think it's awesome that probably every line of open source code I've ever written is like embedded in the compressed nature of these LLMs, right? Like that's to me, that's I'm contributing to the greater good in a very concrete way. But the to your point about like the payment and the mixed feelings, the downside of that I think anyone who's worked on open source for any amount of time is sustainability becomes really hard.
Yeah.
The way that I like to describe it is you start off working on something because you're intrinsically motivated. Maybe you're just like excited about an idea, you want to scratch an itch, and so you build a prototype, you put it out there, and then maybe it gets some traffic. People start to treat you like you're like, hey man, this doesn't work, and you're like, bro, I just put the code out there. What do you want me to do? But so sometimes people just have expectations or whatever around it, and then it becomes more of a chore and this thing that like you need to justify. And for a lot of the big open source developers, you could go and work at whatever big company and make a lot of money. So that's like a conscious trade-off you have to deal with. And but I spent a lot of time. So one of my past startups was called Sassify, and I was trying to help solve this problem around like how can you help developers, open source developers, create a sustainable lifestyle and go and follow their passion sustainably. And I believe one of the well in kind of that those learnings, I'll say a few takeaways. One, like open source developers and like people who should own and run a SaaS business are not always the same people, and for a variety of reasons. And two, I still believe that if the single highest leverage thing that you can do for your career as a developer or more generally, but specifically for developers is to embrace what we'll call the creator mindset. And that's doing exactly what we're doing right now. It's flipping that switch in your brain from thinking like what I'm working on isn't good enough or what I'm working won't be useful to just like sharing by default, right?
Yeah.
If you have something that you're excited about, like there will be other people in the world who are also excited about it. And you never know, it can start off simple, it can start off really small, but it's so powerful and it compounds over time. It's like the core lessons from the creator economy of building a personal brand, putting content out there. But if it's useful, if it's genuine and people will connect with it, like that's what's up. That will lead to just so many more opportunities than you could have ever thought of a traditional, like I'm going to go apply to a job or something like.
Yeah. And I think like opportunity, maybe the word opportunity and impact are interchangeable. Something that shifted in my mindset maybe about a year ago after having worked as a developer professionally for close to 7-8 years. About a year ago, I was like doing stuff with LLMs and seeing the stuff that like you were doing, that other people were doing, and I realized I was like, I can just share what I'm doing online and like people will use it, and that's so cool. And it was actually like such a small amount of effort to just spend like 10 minutes writing a nice tweet and 10 minutes writing docs for whatever it is that you're working, and just be like, this is an experiment, like use at your own risk, whatever.
Please don't, like on Hacker News, people are known for just being super harsh. Like the vast majority of people out there, though, especially if you frame it right, like that they're just like supportive, and I try to just be default like supportive of anyone that's, because it's like a vulnerable thing. You're putting yourself out there. Somebody described it as like you're tapping a tuning fork, and you're like it's sending out waves, and you're seeing who it resonates out in the web. And if you do that enough times, and you are increasing the surface area for serendipity for other people and the right people to find you. And I mean, that's how we got connected. It's how I've met so many people who are on a similar wavelength of just let's brainstorm, let's jam on ideas, or like I saw this package. Like at least in the open source world, that can be a very concrete thing. It's I created a PR, and I'm like, dude, this is like a really well done PR. I want to meet who the person is behind this PR or whatever. Yeah.
And it's so fun. I think like it's the most fun I've ever had almost. There's nothing I would rather do than just meet the most interesting people, work on the stuff I care about. Yeah, it's an amazing ecosystem to be a part of, and it's been really like a privilege to do it the last year. And I think we are at this pivotal moment too with open source and some of the concerns around like AI safety and open source versus proprietary, and who actually has access to these models. And I think the open source community has an opportunity to like just have a massive impact, generational impact over the next decade as this technology becomes more widely used, and to be a part of that.
And just not restricted to the hands of the few. Even though, I mean, when the OpenAI drama was happening, I was following that like real closely. It's cool. It's the closest thing to a real life drama or like a Succession type thing in real time. But at the same time, I still feel that we're probably better off not only having a couple of companies have that much power, because right now, like it's an overstatement to say that, but I think we can all extrapolate down the line a little bit and really start to think about where the amount of power that these companies could hold.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that goes sort of hand in hand in this is what happens when what happens when these tools are completely democratized and anyone can use them, and you end up with everything is hyper-personalized, right? You come to a website and it's like the color schemes that you like, and you can build your own software on the fly to do something. You just tell your computer and it just does it for you. It's what does it mean to be like a technologist at that point? If anyone can go build whatever technology they want in the software world,
I mean, I'm all about that.
SaaS company, is that even a thing anymore?
Or when what we call no code tools, but you can think of kind of the ultimate version of that being a very smart, like just natural language way to like programming is in a lot of ways, or good programming is just a very specific version of natural language where you talk through what happens. Where you start to run into issues with that is, well, to create a good program, you naturally have to talk about what happens in certain cases and be very specific, and then that leads to developing a syntax, and now you're programming, right? And so that kind of ladder of abstraction between like natural language to no code tools to low code tools to programming, that's going to change, I think, immensely. The one thing that you mentioned around personalized content, I'd like to maybe dive into that a little bit. Like, I think if I think through from first principles, the larger like forces of how we consume content and how content is created for a sec. We've had just an immense amount of influx of content creation, and like the creator economy, and like kids these days used to want to become astronauts, and now it's I want to be a YouTuber, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a fundamental change in society where we're just becoming more digitally native. But if you extrapolate that out with the addition of kind of AI augmented generation, or just completely autonomous AI generation of content, there's this concept of the content singularity, the point in time at which there's more AI generated content than human generated content on the web, and you can start to ask questions like what are the implications of that? Well, one implication is that your attention, and I think you guys are attention heads. That's one of the like, yeah, it's an AI term, but it's also definitely like the creator economy. The scarcest resource is people's attention, right? And this is going to become even more scarce as the personalized and the AI, like the ability to capture your attention when everything is hyper personalized is going to be harder the further we go on this. And if I just to keep going on this thought process a little bit, what are the secondary effects of that? I think that aggregators like Google and feeds are going to become even more important than they already are for finding things, and have even more control over our lives. And then the individuals who people trust, like trust is going to become even more scarce than it already is. Like people just don't know what to trust anymore. So you find like individuals who you trust and who you proxy trust through, and that can oftentimes be the most efficient way to consume information. Is what did Chamath say about this, or what did Andrew Huberman say about this, or something, because there's so much a deluge of information out there. We just don't have the capacity. We're biologically, we weren't built like for this information super age. So this is a long way of getting to what I've been jamming on more recently, which is this platform called Dexa that I'm really excited about. And the founder of Dexa, Riley Tomasek, like a year ago, released this demo of what now is kind of like everyone's seeing this type of thing, but at the time it was kind of very, very novel, of the ability to talk to an AI Andrew Huberman and ask him questions about that were factually driven from his show. And it just like it blew up. It was one of those like light bulb moments for people. And I'd say there's a few things that excite me about like this approach and Dexa as a platform. The first is that I just love the creator economy and the developer side of that, open source, so much, and people trust people and individuals, and so leaning into that trend and having it be not about like I'm getting information from an AI, but like I'm getting information from this person. It just happens to be like packaged through an AI because that one person can't scale like that. That's something I'm excited about. And also the fact that it's just like, it's hard to do well. Like you and I have both built probably a RAG system multiple times at this point for different like projects. It's like a hello world of AI engineering.
Yeah.
But to go from building a RAG system to building a RAG system that represents like a top 1% creator that has hundreds of millions of fans, where their personal brand is everything. I mean, the example I like to give is let's say you want to try to create a RAG system for answering questions from the Lex Fridman podcast. Well, Lex Fridman had Kanye West on his podcast. He's had some like different people. If you accidentally say like Lex Fridman said this and somebody screen capture, like you have to be very careful, and it's a very like doing that well at scale, both the ingestion side and doing things like speaker identification,
100%.
and so it's a hard problem technically, and then like the implications of that on the actual like well, I trust people for information over like these AI overlords and stuff. Like that to me, that's really, really interesting. Yeah, and it's early days right now, but where that could go, I think is a really interesting and worthwhile direction to pursue.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, this is a problem that I was super excited about a year ago. I launched something very similar to what Riley launched.
Yeah, yeah,
We could do it for like any YouTube channel, and ran into the same problems that you're talking about, like speaker diarization alone. You have like a podcast, and they have guests that say one thing and guests that say another thing, and it's like,
yeah.
and you have a RAG system that's pulling data. It's got to be like organized properly, and yeah, hard engineering problems.
Yep.
Even like speaker diarization, that's not a solved problem yet. Like you could,
And it's not like there were certain podcasts that are like easier than others. Like some podcasts, they always have more or less the same speakers.
Right.
Some there might be 7 or 8 speakers and they're different every week. And like it just when you try to do this at scale for say indexing all of the podcast content, like you quickly run into areas where it's difficult to automate.
Yeah, it was one of those problems where I was like, oh, this is going to be so easy. Like this, you get into it and you're like, oh my God, there's so many edge cases here. And
yeah, the typical hacker news comment, bro, what is this? This is a weekend project. It's, sure, but like the real version, the version that like I know from experience, a lot of these creators, like their brand is everything. They're rightfully concerned what happens when you can circumvent me and just maybe have an AI that creates a podcast or an AI using my likeness, right? And so I think a big challenge and something at the intersection of what I'd say the creator economy and AI is how do you align the incentives of these creators who are providing all of the value and the content and have done the really difficult job of like building trust and an audience. How do you align those incentives with the kind of AI technology to make them more accessible at scale? And I think we're just like exploring what that looks like, but it's going to be a really important thing to figure out.
I agree, and I think this is maybe the only like long-term AI X blockchain.
Like, oh, we're getting into crypto here. I don't know, bro.
But it's the only one where I'm like, okay, like you need to be able to verify information, so you can use like cryptographic signatures for that. It needs to be like globally scalable, cross-border, whatever. There's an argument to be made. I'm not going to be the one to build it.
So someday, I mean, it's a possibility. I know one of my favorite creators and VCs, Legion, who coined the term passion economy. And if you're not familiar, like passion economy is the creator economy, just like the less sexy version of it, focused on kind of knowledge work. But she definitely has strong opinions on how crypto could be used to I'd say both add the level of verification as well as have more direct ownership and a direct connection. Like a big challenge with platforms like YouTube. It's great for distribution. They have the scale. They have the users for discovery, but you don't have like a direct connection with your audience, and you're kind of, it's a platform risk. If YouTube wants to block you or take you off or so the ability to have a direct connection with your fans, whether that's just having a newsletter or something like Substack or something more kind of like crypto in the future. To be perfectly honest, I'm not like that bullish on crypto. I think it's still maybe, well, it's just, it's hard because there's just been so many frauds and it tracks that type of stuff. Yeah. But one thing I'd call out there is one of the most interesting open source projects that I worked on is back in like 2013 is a project called WebTorrent. And the original author was this guy, Faraz, who now runs a company called Socket.dev. It's awesome for doing NPM, like security stuff. But WebTorrent was an implementation of the BitTorrent protocol over WebRTC data channels, which in layman's terms meant that you could run BitTorrent on the web. And it was decentralized file sharing just on the web, which is a really powerful primitive. You could think of, for instance, building something, a video sharing site like YouTube that scales as well as YouTube does, but is entirely peer-to-peer decentralized. Now, everything I just talked about is a lot of the same talking points as like blockchain and crypto, but it has nothing to do with blockchain and crypto. It's just
Right.
peer-to-peer and the decentralization component of that, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is like peer-to-peer decentralization is something that has existed before kind of blockchain, but the blockchain adds a level of verifiability, and like there are trade-offs there.
I think what's interesting about what you're talking about, where you have AI generated content, becomes entirely pervasive. We hit this singularity moment, and people, the default becomes like, I don't trust anything that I see online. And so you just ignore it. Like the vast majority of the internet just becomes like irrelevant for you. And you have a couple data streams that you don't trust. And it's almost like we come full circle back to when public distribution was a thing, right? Where you come back to the town square, and you have like the guy in the middle of the town square with like the scroll from the town over, and it's like, the king is dead. And everyone's like, all right, well, so-and-so says the king is dead, and like, he's the guy we all trust. And so
that's your proxy for trust. The difference is the scale of that distribution is just so different. We're talking about worldwide, instantaneous. Do you know Tim Urban from Wait But Why?
Yeah.
I love him as a writer, as a speaker, but he wrote about he was writing about Neuralink and Elon Musk's kind of life mission and different things. And but one of the things I remember taking away from that is if you were an alien species, completely like no priors, no bias, and you were to view humanity as it exists today, like we would seem like a hive mind, right? And our ability to instantly communicate things across great distances, and have, if you're in your alien spaceship and you go poke a person over in Shanghai, and then instantly like all the people are scurrying about on the other side of the world. Oh, this is like a hive-minded species, right? And this is like a next form of evolution. I mean, I'm getting a little sci-fi, but it is a cool kind of way to think about things.
Yeah, because I don't think anyone or most people really conceptualize themselves as part of the hive mind. They're like, oh, the hive mind exists over there, but it's no. Like we're all part of it.
Yeah, and so just maybe one more thing on that. I think of it as like humans have had multiple distinct evolutionary stages. We have kind of our like reptilian brain that's responsible for base autonomic like functions, and then we have our kind of higher level brain that is more higher order functions and things. And if you think about it, like we all, pretty much all of us have a phone that is like within reach of us right now, right? And I like to think of it as a tertiary brain, and it's something that like is definitely a form of evolution. And like Elon Musk had this quote, because he was asking about will humanity develop into the cyberpunk future? Will we end up merging with technology, right? And his point was like we basically already are. Like if you think of an average person with a cell phone, a smartphone in 2023, compared to just 30 years ago, at like the most powerful person in the world, and your ability to access information and communicate at scale, like say the president of the United States in the 1990s versus your average person with a phone today, the potential to access information, to get your thoughts out to the entire world, like we're already androids. We're already like in that hybrid space,
and it essentially happened in a decade.
That's
the crazy part, is it just happened so quickly, and all of a sudden we're connected. And I think taking a step back and looking at like the long arc of history and time, we still haven't totally played that all the way out. What are the implications of us being this super hyper connected thing that now transmit information instantly? I know we're about
like one of the real quick, just on that, I want to share. I don't know if I could share my screen. There's like a visual representation of that I just want to share really quick. And it's like going back to thinking about thinking about what AI is, and we have these like LLMs that are a form of intelligence that we don't fully understand, and then you're, or like some people refer to it as Shoggoth, and then you have this kind of like what the difference between pre-ChatGPT and ChatGPT was essentially the RLHF layer that just added a little human smiley face that just made it more usable in front, but it's really like a form of alien intelligence that is fundamentally different than how humans learn and how we think about intelligence. And then just thinking about like the human progress through time and the implications of that, there's a cool way of thinking about it. And it's, yeah, we're on this exponential like trend, but now it's like the AI creature is like pulling us up with us. And if there's one mental image I'd like want to just kind of leave with everything we've touched on, it'd be this one.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got like this like rocket ship now that we're strapped to, and it's not entirely in our hands in a way that is unprecedented.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, this has been super fun. This is definitely one of my favorite conversations that we've had so far. We'd love to have you back on. I'll see you online.